Chapter 9. Cautiously, a deer walked up to the edge of a stream, scanning its surroundings for any signs of danger. Against its better judgment, it left the safety of the trees, unable to resist, and slowly ventured out toward the promise of a fresh drink of water. It passed the budding apple trees, casting long shadows from the morning sun. With every step, it moved out of its cover, unaware of me, lying in wait with my rifle trained on it. It was such a long shot, I had to wait for it to stop moving so the bullet would have time to get to its target. I resisted the temptation to pull the trigger, and patiently waited for the deer to close the distance between us and stop at the edge of the river. Almost every morning, I had noticed a group of deer grazing in the fields by the apple trees. With our meat and food getting low, it was an irresistible solution to the problem. As the deer reached the river, it glanced around and, once satisfied, lowered its head to taste the cold water. I aimed up and to the left to account for the wind, then let out my breath slowly. With the long exhale, steam surrounded me, warming my hand on the trigger as I gave it a gentle squeeze. With a flash from the muzzle, I kept us from starving, at least for a couple more weeks. The rifle jumped, all of the force from the recoil being absorbed into my shoulder. It was amazing how good of a shot I could be when my life depended on it. Hitting the deer, but not killing it immediately, could have meant time wasted tracking it, and more distance to drag it back to the house, not to mention needless suffering for the animal. If possible, I always made it painless, killing them before they even heard the shot. Missing them entirely meant going hungry. They rarely gave a second chance. When they heard the shot, most of the time they bolted back into the trees, never to be seen again. Over the winter, I'd had time to hone my skills with a rifle out of necessity. Saul had a lot of food, but when he had gathered it, he thought he would only be feeding one person. When the ground was frozen, the only other way to feed us was with the meat of critters that were too slow to get away from us. In an attempt to keep a balanced diet, Lily had rationed out the food, separating the greens and carbs, and devising a meal plan that counted on us being able to find a consistent source of protein. Winter meant a break in egg production, meaning hunting had become a full-time job. I had to start venturing out farther from the house each time to look for tracks. Lily's nest had become essential. She had even set up more of them near food and water sources. Yet every time I managed to get a deer and put it in the freezer in the basement, I realized I was fighting a losing battle. Despite my good fortune, I was unable to replace our meat supply as fast as we were eating it. With Saul's packaged food stretched thin, our diets had gone from the usual heavy processed foods, fats, sugars, carbs, salt, to one without all the extra additives. You never know how much you need salt until it's nearly completely removed from your diet. The worst, however, was when the sugar supply ran out. I resorted to just drinking my coffee black and, like a junkie, ate as many apples as I could to compensate. Yet by some miracle we survived the coldest months, and the changing of the seasons meant so much more to us than just warmer weather. With spring's arrival, there were more options available. The river was always good for fishing, and the vegetation was providing us with greens and also luring in other animals eager for a meal themselves. I relaxed, stretched, and took my time to get to my feet. I had been lying on a mat under a cocoon of blankets, reading, and periodically looking through the scope, waiting for dinner to walk in front of me for hours. I closed the book that was stolen from Saul's library, cracked my back, and picked the rifle up off the ground. I folded up the bipod, but before slinging it around my back, I unloaded it and flipped the safety on. The roof had become the place where I spent most of my nights, with my two most important duties: look out for anyone who might want to pay us a visit, or anything that might serve as food to us. It was hard to say which one was more important. Food was always on my mind, but so was the possibility that some desperate souls might show up at our door. Saul kept insisting that it happened every year. Eliminating the nightly watches was simply not up for discussion. My sleep schedule was completely reversed compared to the rest of the world. To me, the rising sun wasn't a sign to get up. Instead, it meant it was almost time for bed. Of late, I slept while Lily and Saul did their chores, and they slept while I did mine. There was precious few hours in the day that Lily and I were able to spend together, and forget about our work. I took the time to straighten my blanket and grab my pack as I headed downstairs to retrieve my catch. What took the bullet to travel in a split second took me a great deal longer as I walked out the doors in the great room to the deck, across the wall, out the courtyard gate, across the river, and finally to the spot where the creature lay. When given the choice, I always killed the bigger deer for its meat, not necessarily the one with the biggest rack for a trophy. I never did enjoy hunting. I always preferred to buy my meat at the grocery store, rather than actually meeting the animal before it was butchered and packaged. I did it to keep us from starving, and looked forward to when I wouldn't have to do it as much. Somehow, eating fish was easier. I think it was the way the deer looked when I watched them through the scope. So peaceful and unaware. Getting to work right away, I set my backpack down, reached in, and pulled out my knife. Just then I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me and turned to see Bruno looking at me with big, intense eyes. "Where's your master?" I asked as he walked in slowly with his head hung low. I wasn't sure when it happened, but over the winter Bruno stopped being my dog and started being Lily's. If he was here, that meant she was also close by. It suited me. If only I could figure out how to get him to stop breaking into my room and sneaking into my bed. Even Saul warmed up to the idea of having him around. He was an early warning system and would surely let us know if anyone got close to the house. And besides that, he caught most of his own food anyway. Bruno had a fascination with hunting small game in the fields that surrounded the house. The rabbits and mice often fed him and kept him active at the same time. I had the best of both worlds when it came to him. The occasional company with almost none of the responsibility that came along with having a dog. I only helped feed him, and in exchange he never let Lily out of his sight, which meant he would never let anything bad happen to her. The only way someone with ill intent could get close to her was if they killed Bruno first. He even barked at me if Lily and I got into an argument. Hunting with him also had its benefits. He was always quick to warn of other animals that were near, although I worried some might think he was prey. Saul wasn't kidding about the wolf problem. At times, when I shot a deer and didn't drop it immediately, that meant that I wouldn't get to eat it. The first time I shot one, the wolves got to it first. When I arrived, the snow around the carcass was tinted red and swarming with wolves eagerly fighting for their share of the kill. Even though I had my rifle, I dared not take on an entire pack in a feeding frenzy. And now, for the really nasty part, I said, looking back at my deer as I put my gloves on and knelt down beside it. I unfolded the knife and went to work cutting its belly open. Then I turned my head the other way to avoid as much of the smell as possible. I hated gutting deer. In my opinion, it was the worst part of the whole process. But I liked meat with my veggies, so I pressed on. Reaching into my pack once again, I pulled out a thin roll of rope, wrapped it around the neck of the deer, and dragged it to the nearest tree that would hold its weight. I threw the rope over a low limb of the oak tree I now stood under, hooked it to the deer's rear legs, and pulled it up to butcher it. I'd let it hang to drain as much of the blood as possible before I went to work cutting it apart. The milder weather made it impossible to let it hang very long without it going bad. During the winter, it was possible to age the meat for a few days, after being sure to hang it high enough, before it was ready to eat. Yet another lesson I learned the hard way. The first time I hung a deer, it was too low. By the time I came back for the meat, the lower half was missing. Nothing but a gory mess surrounded by bloody wolf prints in the snow. At first I planned on shooting the wolves, as Saul had suggested, to cut down on the wolf population for the sake of preserving the deer. But for some reason I hesitated every time I spotted one. I'd end up flipping the rifle's safety back on and letting the wolf go unharmed. After a while, I realized from his markings it was the same wolf. His appearance in the early hours of the morning was routine. Through the scope on my rifle, he seemed so close, so proud and confident as he looked back at me as if he could see me on the roof. I reached in my bag once more and pulled out a bundle of large plastic bags and a bottle of clean water. As I cut the meat, I washed and separated it, being sure to set aside the low-grade meat for Bruno. Since being on his new diet, I noticed he had trimmed down but put on a lot of bulk. His coat was a smooth, dark, healthy brown with a shine to it from all the protein he ate. Through his thin coat, every muscle in his shoulders was more visible than it had been 6 months ago. The endless running after rabbits and mice conditioned him into a seasoned athlete. I myself noticed that I had to tighten my belt a little more. "All this hunting and gathering is good for you," I said sarcastically to Bruno as he pawed at the scraps left behind after I loaded up my backpack. Now heavy with fresh, warm meat, I heaved it up onto my shoulders, the straps digging in my skin as I started to walk back to the house. The warmth of it on my back was a disturbing reminder it wasn't long ago my steaks were alive. Lily had been busy restoring the house to its former glory, going through it and cleaning each room and organizing our supplies, and since the break in weather, tending her new garden, as well as the potted plants on the roof. She replaced the dead with a mix of hibiscus and other various arrangements. The greenhouse was still completely stocked with all the necessary seeds and other materials to transform the surrounding area back to its painstakingly cared-for beauty. The seed stock was an especially welcome discovery, as the types of seeds were that of flowers as well as vegetables. Without them, we would have never had such a variety of food. One thing Saul did insist on was that we eat breakfast together. I initially thought the idea was old-fashioned, but he did have a point. It turned out it was Lily's favorite time of the day. She had her own demands at this time, however. Anything that even resembled work or the situation outside had been banished from the table. It was our one moment to forget, relax, and enjoy each other's company. My nights were mostly the same. No drama, not since that night with Saul when we heard gunshots in the distance. I always wondered what it was, and knew that someday my curiosity would get the better of me and I would need to find out what happened in town. Occasionally, Lily had a hard time sleeping, and joined me up in the garden next to the fire. She always had a long train of blankets following her, but for some reason she preferred it to her room when she couldn't sleep. Even now, well into spring, the nights could still be cold for her. Often, she sat so close to the fire I had to keep an eye on her and the blankets. As time passed, I noticed Lily had become more of a night owl, staying up late into the night with me on the tower, while I found myself staying up later in the morning to help her with her garden. Saul and I were almost strangers. Our sleep schedules were opposite, and when we weren't sleeping, we were usually working. As he had done to me before when I was faced with a hard situation, he took it upon himself to fill my schedule, not leaving much time to get lost in self-pity or dwell on the loss of life going on around us. Lily pointed out stars on clear nights, naming off constellations that she made up and rambling on and on about anything that popped into her head. It wasn't until she fell asleep that she would stop talking. At first, that drove me nuts, but then I started to enjoy her stories and questions. Something about her high, smooth voice was oddly relaxing. Something about her was so innocent, and being around her was refreshing and a nice break from my own thoughts. I was a lot like Saul that way. We always planned for the worst and hoped for the best, usually because the worst-case scenario was the most likely. Lily was just the opposite. She saw the best in every situation. I thought it must be exhausting always being that positive. A part of me wondered if that was how she actually saw the world or if it was a front. As I got closer to the house, my morning catch on my back, I heard something. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? No, it was definitely there, but just for a second. I thought I heard singing over the wind. It was coming from the house, as was an irresistible scent from the kitchen. Then I heard music. Once I got in the house and rounded the corner from the stairs to enter the main dining room, I stopped to take in what had become of our kitchen. In her favorite yellow summer dress, white apron on, Lily vigorously chopped apples from the orchard across the river. Her hair was pinned back out of the way, but no matter how hard she tried, some of her curls managed to escape, as if she'd had a head full of blonde springs with minds of their own. I had never seen her with her hair up and intact. The music was up so loud she didn't hear me come in. I stood there for a while, watching her dance around the kitchen, and part of me wondered if this was what she was like every time she cooked. If that was the case, I'd have to take more interest in cooking. The frail, malnourished, timid girl I met on my way here almost seemed like a different person from the now sinewy, full of spirit, capable person I had grown to know. She looked healthy and strong, likely from our full diet and all the work she'd been doing over winter. What were once pale, skinny legs were now toned with a hint of color from the endless hours working in the garden. As soon as the water was warm enough, Lily spent the majority of her free time swimming in the pond on the other end of the grounds. It was a favorite spot of hers to unwind, and provided a place to escape while still on Saul's property. Even Bruno, who was originally afraid of water, followed her into the water at times. Now that I thought about it, we all had changed a little over the winter. "Whoa," she said, turning toward me in surprise. "I didn't hear you come in." "Well, I could hear you all the way to the river. It's a good thing we don't have neighbors. They would have called the cops long ago." I turned down the music. "How'd I sound?" she asked. "You're getting better. I think you need a little more soul, though." I rolled my pack off my shoulders onto the ground, glad to be rid of the weight. Lily leaned over. "Aw, poor little guy." She sighed as she inspected the meat. "I'll do my best to find something to go with it." She set aside a few of the bags on the counter and divided the rest between the fridge and the freezer. "Today's going to be a good day," she said with a nod as she filled up 3 plates and set the table. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" I asked. "Because I said it is," she said with a smile. "This is my morning song. It isn't very long." Lily went on a mini quest, digging through cabinets and the fridge while she tried to figure out a meal plan. "Do you know the average person smiles over 50 times in a day? Well, I only smile once. I wake up in the morning, yawn, brush my teeth, then smile. And I keep smiling until it's time to go to bed." She shot me a glance, and for a few moments I allowed myself to believe it was true. At first, I had thought her attitude was genuine, but as of late I couldn't help but notice her chipper facade had begun to show its cracks. "So, what you're saying is you're below average?" I teased, pushing the thought from my mind. Lily glared at me as she finished laying out an odd assortment of ingredients. Then she turned back and tried to make sense of the mess she had made on the counter. "What are you making?" "Isn't it obvious?" she asked, puzzled. "Pie." "Pie?" I echoed, remembering Lily had a legendary sweet tooth and had gone a little mad a few months back searching the house for a rumored chocolate stash that was tucked away. "Do you have everything you need to make it? We're way past the expiration date on any fruit." "I had the foresight to freeze the apples. I really have the urge for cherry pie with ice cream, but we don't have any cherries or ice cream. We don't have any sugar either, but I had to make do," she said as she frantically diced up another apple. The more she talked, the faster she chopped, and extra springs of hair escaped her rubber band. "It's not like I can just make a quick run into town and pick up the things I need." Chop, chop, chop. "Thank goodness I found flour sealed up in an airtight container in the kitchen. There isn't any chance Saul has any in his kitchen downstairs. I can't picture him making anything that would need it." She scraped the diced apples off the cutting board and into a bowl. Grabbing another handful of apples, she continued the process all over again. "But we had plenty of apples, and if that wasn't enough, Saul has shelves full of canned ones. I'm guessing he purchased them from a local farmer. So, I'm making apple pie. I just feel like I want a treat." "I thought Saul had some almonds around here," I said, flipping through the mess on the counter. "I remember Saul left them here in case any of us wanted them. I know it's not chocolate, but..." Quick as a snake, Lily stabbed the knife in the cutting board, making a deep thunk sound. "I don't want almonds. Haven't you been listening? I want pie," she snapped with a slightly crazed look. "All right," I said reassuringly as I backed away slowly. "I was just trying to help." "I don't want to sound unappreciative, but I'm just getting sick of being cooped up in here." Her resolve to maintain a positive attitude was wavering. "It's been months since we got here and we haven't left." She pulled the knife free from the board and continued slicing. I just wish we could make a quick run to town. We haven't heard from anyone or seen anything that would suggest we can't. What if things are back to normal? How long before we finally get the ambition to venture out? I don't know what's worse, keeping our heads in the sand like this or taking our chances outside. One thing to consider is that we are, in fact, running out of food. We're doing okay now, eating whatever you catch or the little that my garden produces, but we aren't setting aside anything for next winter. You men never plan ahead. At some point, we will need to leave. Lily, it's not that this was ever supposed to be forever, I reminded her. We're just trying to do our best and wait it out. You're right, eventually we will have to leave. And at that point, we can go back to our lives, or whatever is left of them. I'm just not convinced now is the time for that. For whatever reason, Saul is very insistent that we don't leave the property, at least not yet. Lily stopped slicing apples and stared thoughtfully at her half-made pie. You're right. He is very insistent. Why do you think that is? How long then? Another 6 months? A year? We already ate almost everything that Saul set aside from the last time he went to town. So at what point exactly do you think we leave? When we're completely out of food? Or do you think when the frost comes again, may be a good time to start thinking about the future? I don't know. But Saul's bound to get sick of us soon anyway, I said lightly. Speak for yourself. Saul likes me around. She frowned. I'll bet the boats are still anchored at the beach where we left them. We could just go and see. Maybe take one of them for a spin. Perhaps we can see something from shore. You would have to sail all the way to the city to be able to see anything from the water. That's what I'm saying, just a quick little trip. We could be back in a couple of days if we don't like what we see, she said hopefully. How is that any better than going to town? I asked. We won't have contact with anyone if we stay on the boat. If we go to town, who knows? She pointed out. There would eventually be things that we would have to go to town to get. I did have a nagging curiosity as to what had happened since that night we first arrived. But part of me knew whatever it wasn't good. Saul never was able to reconnect with his friend Harlan, or anyone else in the area for that matter. I'll talk to Saul about it, but I already know what he's going to say. I could just go by myself if no one wants to go with me, she said, as if that was an option. It's just not a good idea. They could still be dealing with infection for all we know. Plus, you remember what it was like before we decided to come up here. People were crawling over one another for the little scraps that were left over. It just simply is not safe. Without a word, she resumed her work on her pie. After piling her sliced apples in the lower crust, she meticulously weaved strips of the top crust over the apples, then poured a butter-flour mixture over it before tossing it in the oven. I sure hope this tastes okay. I'll be so disappointed if it doesn't. But without sugar, I had to get creative. She pulled off her apron and hung it on a hook in the closet, then crouched in front of the oven eagerly. Okay, it should be ready in a little less than an hour. Can't wait. I snatched up my empty pack and rifle. As I walked downstairs, Bruno shot up off the floor and started to follow me. But once he noticed Lily wasn't coming, he plopped back down on the tile floor. I wondered if Lily would crouch in front of the stove for the entire time it took the pie to bake, watching it turn golden brown through the glass until it was ready. I took the time before breakfast to take a quick, hot shower. After spending the night on the roof and taking the deer apart, nothing sounded better to me. In the bathroom in the basement, I turned on the water and stripped bare, leaving my grimy clothes in a pile while the shower filled up with steam that was so hot and thick it filled my lungs and almost made it hard to breathe. The water fell from a large plate in the ceiling like rain and quickly made me forget about the night's activities, relaxing me to the point of deciding to skip pie and head straight for bed. But as soon as I walked out of the bathroom, an apple cinnamon smell drew me back upstairs. By the time I got there, Saul was there too. He had been drawn to the kitchen by the smell as well. I found him leaning up against the wall, staring at the maze just outside the window. He periodically sipped at his coffee as usual, Once the sun dropped behind the horizon, the coffee cup was replaced with a glass of whiskey. "I heard a gunshot earlier. Did you get anything?" Saul asked as he sat down at the table. Lily transferred a slice from the pan to Saul's plate. The slice crumbled, and steam rolled up from the apples. "Wow, this smells really good, Lily. Thanks." Saul immediately got to work, shoveling a piece in his mouth. "Yeah, just a little one. It's a good thing, too. We're running low on meat. Soon we'll have to learn to be happy with salads, or maybe give chicken a try." I took a bite of the pie. Instead of the sweet, syrupy taste I expected, it was bland and mushy. I looked over at Saul, not sure what to say as I forced myself to swallow. "You stay away from my chickens," Saul shot back sharply, glaring across the table. "Those are my babies, and besides, that's a short-term gain, long-term loss strategy. We eat the chickens and we won't have any eggs. Speaking of which, as soon as we're done here, I have to check on them. I think I'm missing one." "Why did you build the chicken coop on the other side of the property?" Lily asked. "Because of the rooster. He's up all hours of the night crowing at the moon or something. I like chickens, but I hate that sound." Saul choked down his own piece of pie. He wasn't as eager to take the second bite as he was the first, but after giving me a panicked look, he forced himself to do it. "Other than that, anything else interesting happened overnight?" "Nope. No news is good news." I stalled and thought about slipping my pie to Bruno. The absence of sugar in the pie reminded me of my conversation with Lily earlier. Our lack of supplies had become very obvious in her cooking. "So, I was thinking, what do you think of me taking your old truck into town and checking on things? Our supplies seem to be getting low, so it may not be a bad idea to go to town before we completely run out." Lily's head snapped up. She looked at me with surprise, then turned eagerly to see Saul's response. "Vince, we've talked about this. There is so much we don't know. We should stay put as long as possible. I know we can't stay put forever. Even I made trips into town from time to time. I just don't think we should right now. If we're careful, we can sit it out a few more months. Food isn't the only thing we're running low on. You can add toilet paper to that list. I'm down to using 3 squares at a time. I think I may only have a few rolls left. I don't think you two understand. We're basically under siege right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that why you guys came up here, to lay low? I'm not going to stop you from leaving, but if you do, don't come back. This plague is a rash that won't go away that easy. It's likely going to be around for years, if only popping up sporadically before it's totally wiped out. When you came up here, it wasn't even the worst of it by my guess." "We need not linger. Can't we just take a peek?" Lily added, trying to sway his decision. She finally sat down and took a bite of her own pie. "Ew, gross," she snapped and spit it out into her napkin. Instantly, she set her plate down on the ground for Bruno. He attacked it and licked the plate clean, clearly unfazed by the taste. "How are you guys still eating that?" "I didn't want to say anything," Saul said, clearly relieved as he pushed the plate forward. "If it tastes gross, don't eat it," she said, appalled. "I tried to sweeten it up with honey, but I didn't have a whole lot of it." "Why didn't you use sugar?" Saul asked, puzzled. "We don't have any." "I have some downstairs. I use it in my coffee." Saul pushed back from the table slowly and disappeared into the basement. As his footsteps faded, an uncomfortable silence filled the air as Lily continued to stare straight forward. By the time he returned, she had developed a twitch from the irritation that I knew ran through her. Saul set a canister down in front of Lily. The heavy white container made a thud and broke the awkward silence. "Thanks," she said simply, as she forced herself to smile to show her gratitude. "But now I'm out of flour." I fought the urge to laugh. It would only make the situation worse. Instead, I quietly collected the plates and delivered them to the sink. When I was a kid, the rule of the kitchen was the only way I got out of doing dishes was to cook the meal. I guess old habits die hard. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out the dish soap, which was almost gone, and got to work cleaning up the mess. All this time, I've been drinking my coffee black because I thought we were out, I said, almost hysterical. Of course, I have some downstairs. I just don't put as much in my coffee as you. When you make coffee, it's more cream and sugar than coffee. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to use it up on me. My mind started to wander about what our lives had become and tried to imagine my life without Lily around. It was hard, especially knowing that less than 6 months ago she was a complete stranger to me. If I hadn't come up here, where would Saul be now? He would have known about the outbreak, but would his life have changed in any way? He never went out as it was anyway. As I finished washing the dishes quietly, Lily and Saul talked about what they had planned for the day. Maybe Lily was right. We were living on borrowed time. Perhaps now was a good time to come up for air and check things out. I was a little surprised that I hadn't been the one to originally propose leaving the grounds. Usually, I had a hard time staying put in one place for very long. I wondered what it was about this place that made me have such a strong desire to stay put. Saul yawned. So much to do. We have to check on my chickens and make sure they aren't getting out somehow. Or worse, those wolves aren't getting in. If a chicken gets too close to the edge of the cage, it's possible a wolf will be able to paw at it. Then at some point, do I have to do some gardening? Fix my truck? He trailed off into another yawn. I'll help, Lily said, rolling up her sleeves. It's up to you and me, Saul. It is so exciting, isn't it? Saul managed a smile in acknowledgement. I knew he loved Lily. He thought of her as the daughter he never wanted, but he hated working with her on any project, big or small. Being the type of guy who always wanted to be left alone when he worked, it was the constant noise from her that he had the hardest time getting used to. Fix your truck? I asked. I was curious as to what made him think to put that on today's to-do list. For what? What's wrong with it? Just a tune-up, he answered. Just because we're not using it now doesn't mean we won't need it soon. I brushed off the comment and yawned, exhausted from my night's activities. That was my cue to leave. Good night. I leaned over Lily's shoulder, kissing her on the cheek as I passed. You mean morning, she corrected with a smile. See you in the morning, I replied, patting Saul's shoulder on the way out of the kitchen. You mean tonight? I dumped my gear in the corner of my room in the shelter between the garage and the main house. As Saul had pointed out earlier, the sunlight during the day made it nearly impossible to sleep in the house. I defiantly tried to make it work for a few months before finally picking a room in Saul's apartment. At first, sleeping there made me feel trapped, but I eventually got used to it. There were 2 entrances to the shelter, one through the house and one through the garage. If both exits were blocked, a person would be stuck. At this point, we knew that wasn't going to happen. If we were trapped, we would die down there, a very discomforting thought. But sleeping underground had its advantages. I looked forward to the cool 65 degrees, perfect for sleeping. My room was a mess. Clothes from the night before lined the floor. I dimmed the lights and tried to trick my internal clock to think it was late and kicked off my boots. As I sat down, I tried to think of the last time I had washed my backpack. It was starting to get a funk to it. Lying back on my bed, I made a mental note to throw it in the wash tomorrow. I let out a sigh of relief that I would get my much-needed sleep. As I drifted off, my last thoughts were of Lily and her proposal about going into town. She had a point. Figuring out what we were going to do about the food situation was a problem better dealt with sooner rather than later.